This is the review of the orderIT system for November the 10th, 2020. This is the orderIT results and the analysis generated from the system. There were 16 trades that were identified. 9 of them were buy trades and 7 were shorts. And we'll just go over them one by one. COF, Capital One Financial. It looks like it ended up coming up from the point of where it was identified as being bought, which was around 11:35. So around to here. But as you can see, even though it ended the day up, there were some points that it looked like it did come down to potentially where it could have shorted 85.98. A couple in here, 85.80. So it did come down, so it wasn't so much that it wasn't a good buy or trade in general. As you can see, it tripped and then started moving sideways. But there were points where it's coming down, so we'll just take a look at the analysis to see what it's saying. It's somewhat saying the same thing. Came down and started bouncing back and forth, but you can see OBV was showing that it was, for the most part, down for the day in general. Even though there were some up points during its downside activity, it still was down overall. MACD, well, actually was showing that it did actually come up afterwards. So MACD was showing a positive upward trending activity for it. DI back and forth, but it looks like a good portion of the day it was actually showing negative. But again, it was back and forth. And again, Bollinger Bands basically just a representation of stock price activity. It did come down and basically stabilize. So it could potentially have been a trade activity, but it would have had to have been followed very closely, and we would have had to get out obviously at the earliest time. So it would have been having to monitor the trade, seeing that it looked like it was moving sideways after a purchase, and then deciding to get out because of the possibility of it not moving down anymore. ELY, Callaway Golf Company. Interestingly, this was actually a trade that was down but was flagged as a buy trade. So that's one of those instances where the system itself identified that it was moving upwards, which was right around this point in time. So it did move upwards, so it moved down for the morning, but then it came up. So this is somewhat similar as a COF trade, but this one actually tripped as a buy because of its positive buy activity here. So let's go see what the analysis is saying. Yeah, analysis is actually very strong. Even though the trade itself was down the day, it was showing strong OBV, and at the end of the day it actually went up quite a bit. MACD, again, for the most part showing it, it bounced back a couple of times, but it was somewhat strong in MACD, and at the end of the day it was moving up in MACD also. DI was showing, for the most part, positive for the day. So again, it was showing somewhat strong positive movements. A little bit of back and forth, but for the most part it was showing positive. In Bollinger Bands, again, just identification of trade, price activity. Again, this is where it identified buy, and you can see by the end of the day you would have made money. So that would have been a positive trade. Okay, so that was the second trade. So CUK. Interestingly enough, another trade identified as a buy No, sorry, this one actually was tripping as a sell. This one tripped as a sell, and it was actually down for the day. It was actually down quite a bit, even though you can see we're looking at this early morning, and we can see that it actually came up early morning after it dropped. But anyways, it was showing negative, somewhat moving sideways in the afternoon, so it looks like in the end of the day it would have been a positive outcome. 11:55. 11:55. 11:55 was showing at 15:20, which it identified 15:10, and it closed at 14:78. So this would have been a positive trade also, negative-wise. The analysis for it. OBV was somewhat showing it moving negative, morning somewhat sideways, and looks to be early afternoon it dropped, which is right around where the trigger for it identified. So right around here it dropped, identified. DI again showing yes, even though MACD is actually showing that it was actually strong positive as much as negative. In fact, all afternoon it was actually a strong positive on MACD. DI morning showing negative, a downtrend, and morning was actually showing a positive trend. So in the morning, in the afternoon it was coming back. Even though Bollinger Band is indicating that, it still was not moving positive at the end of the day, even though the indicators were showing somewhat a positive movement. At the end of the day, it wasn't. The volume itself was showing that it was moving positive, but not a strong positive. It was still down below zero, which still indicates it was still somewhat in a negative side of things, even though it was moving positive from there. So that's just a clarification of how the stock is moving. But that was a positive trade. Next trade is ADT. This is a buy, and interestingly enough, it shows that it opened up and then closed roughly at the same price, so technically no movement. But as you can see from the analysis, it was showing somewhat positive. LBV showing positive for the whole day. MACD, interestingly, early morning, almost midday, actually no, early afternoon. Early afternoon it was showing a negative downward activity, but came back, early afternoon, came back and somewhat stayed stable, even though it was somewhat, center lined itself, which kind of like gives a representation of what's going on, which is interesting. Like you can see that it was tripped at 12:11. 12:11, so it would have been roughly in this area, but you can see it actually did get up to 739 and then dropped at the end of the day. So interestingly, the analysis is showing that it wasn't pushing strong, or wasn't pushing downwards. So everything was still positive. Even the Bollinger Bands themselves was not showing that dip at the end of the day. It's still a positive because even before it even hit the end of day, it actually was up above the indicator. So that's another positive. But again, would have required obviously the trader to be monitoring and then getting out at a time that was appropriate. FBC, Flagstar Bancorp, showing a good positive movement. It was showing positive as a positive trade. It was somewhat moving sideways, even though it did finish the day up from the trade indicator entry point. Morning, moving sideways. Afternoon, it shot up a bit on OBV. So the volume, volume was moving strongly in the positive direction on OBV in the afternoon, which is good. Volume is always good because it means, you know, it's being, you know, pushed a lot in that direction because of the amount of activity on it. MACD, morning was showing, but afternoon somewhat just baseline, again indicating sideways movement for the most part, so not really indicating anything else. So you caught it in the morning, but it wasn't really till the afternoon that it just started moving sideways. And MACD was actually showing a drop at the end of the day. DI also showing mostly positive, but again at the end of the day it did revert, and Bollinger Bands is showing that it did drop in the day, but it was still positive because it did come up above a point where it could be bought. You can see at 32.41. So you can see at this point here it was up a good amount from the trade point. So that was a positive trade also. HUYA, and that actually is the name of the company. Huya, I guess. Interestingly enough, this was down, and as you can see, early morning, it recovered. That's always the interesting thing about stocks, is that you can see stuff like this happening, and the whole premise is, you know, why did it drop one day and then the next day it shot right back up? And that's really aspects of fundamental analysis can't really make these kind of conclusions very easily. You gotta look at the explicit information of the company and what happened that actually tripped us. So this would indicate that you would have really had to get out of the stock, and you can see that technically it was moving sideways at that point. We'll see what the analysis says. It had points where it did drop, so an interesting thing is right at the end of the day it came up. So this actually was down at the end of the day, and it was right at the closing point that the stock actually increased. So this is technically still a positive trade, but as you can see, it had a reversal opening today on the stock. So volume, interestingly, it was actually positive volume, even though there was some downtrends on the positive side. It was still positive. MACD was actually showing positive on MACD too, for the most part. The place where it identified was around this place, so it was moving downwards, and that's where it tripped. And again, tripped again very suddenly also, so it just happened to be a hiccup in the analysis. And Bollinger Band was actually showing positive movement for the day. Interestingly enough, the actual end result is that it would have been positive, but the analysis, interestingly enough, on top of that, was showing somewhat that it was moving positive as opposed to negative. So that's very, very interesting. Pardon me, I went in there. Six trade. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, that's not the right trade. That's 32. That's the one after this one. Okay, it's this one. Alright. Alright. Actually, it looks like I was on the wrong stock. Okay, this is a better indication. This was showing negative morning, afternoon it came back. MACD, it was showing negative in the afternoon, came back a little bit at the end of the day. DI, again, showing same type of thing. And okay, so this was actually the correct stock. I was looking at the wrong analysis. So this was the stock. So, again, it would have been another positive buy. Okay, so let's take a look at the next one, which is GFI Goldfield Limited. This is indicating as a short sell yesterday, but as you can see again, this is another one showing morning that it actually came back up. So, you know, interesting in the aspects of how the stock is moving. Just make sure we're on the right one. 11, okay, we're on the right one. $10.99, 11.04. So this stock would have been a positive stock because it closed below the trade indicator. So at the end of the day, selling at the end of the day still would have made a profit on this one. As you can see though, OBV is showing it moving downwards in the afternoon. MACD, interestingly enough, it was showing a strong positive movement in the afternoon, even though it was tripped early afternoon, negative-wise, and then came up right around 2 p.m. in the afternoon. It kind of reverted a bit. So MACD is showing somewhat a negative and then positive. OBV is showing somewhat just a positive, even though moved negative, it had a bunch of up spikes during that, so which is probably a correlation with MACD moving positive in the afternoon. DI bouncing back and forth. It did trip in the afternoon and was up fairly strongly, and bounced back and forth in the afternoon, late afternoon. And Bollinger Bands was basically showing us it came in and then dropped. Had a bit of recovery at the end of the day, but it would drop. But this is still a positive trade. This is Denny's Corporation. This dropped a lot. I don't know if this is Denny's, the restaurant, but kind of makes sense because obviously restaurants are not doing too good during this time. And it's showing a drop of almost 10.5%. So that's not good for them, obviously. Looks like the right stock. And the analysis is again, it is OBV showing that it's down below the baseline, which indicates it's somewhat, a negative, movement downwards on volume. Even though you can see it bounced back at the end of the day. It started moving back at the end of the day, but the afternoon itself it was moving down. Excuse me. MACD is actually showing there's real no strong indication MACD wise, even though it was at the time that it tripped was moving down, but moving sideways for the most part on MACD, bouncing back and forth. DI, again, same thing. It was pushing downwards early afternoon, but you can see as you got into the afternoon period, it started moving positive, but at the end of the day it started moving downwards again. So the end result is downwards. The Bollinger Band looks though that the flow and the actual movement was downwards for the whole day. And it looks like, this would have been another positive trade, sell-wise. And this is BLDP, Ballard Power Systems. Tripped and it was down 6.75%. Okay. And it looks like it was moving downwards at the end of the day. So we'll take a look at the analysis. It looks like another positive trade. Ah. 13.40. Okay. OBV somewhat showing moving sideways, but did bounce back and forth, and it was downward, so it was somewhat a negative movement on volume. MACD, well, that was moving sideways for the most part, so MACD wasn't really indicating any heavy movement. The system itself had indicated, because there was a point where it tripped the indicator strong enough to identify there was a movement that was good enough for it. Could be maybe a potential aspects of, of maybe fine-tuning that can be put into the system. DI is showing somewhat very much a negative downward activity, so trending was showing down, and again the Bollinger Band just an indication that it was moving down, so another positive trade. Let's go to the next one. HALO is the acronym. Halozyme Therapeutics is, I think, how it's pronounced. This is a buy. And it somewhat was at the point of buy, so it looks like it was moving sideways after the indicator, which was right around here. So it did move that way. 38.30 is any point in time. Yeah. Could have made some money at this point, but as you can see, it was moving sideways at the end of the day, so it's not 100% positive, but still not bad, because the day end result was that it was still moving in a fairly good direction. OBV was showing, obviously, it was moving fairly positively strong-wise, fluctuating back and forth, but again, that's normal for the stock markets to see that kind of activity, so nothing strange there. MACD, it was slow in the morning, so it was pushing downwards in the morning from the MACD perspective, volume-wise. This is a moving average, but it did come down. Moved positive in the afternoon. The afternoon was moving fairly positive, and DI looks to be the same. MACD and DI are showing a bouncing activity, which I guess maybe kind of correlates to the Bollinger Band, because Bollinger Band seems like it's moving up and down price-wise. So nothing strange there, but the end result is that at the end of the day you could have still made a trade and still made money, and it did close up on the trade entry point, so technically a positive trade because of it. So in general, this stock was still a positive trade, even though it would not have been a great end result, because it didn't move very high above the trigger point. So let's look at the next stock. BHC, Bausch Health Companies. Looks like it's moving positive, and the end result of the day is that it was up from the trigger point, so again it was moving positive. Looks like the analysis is somewhat in line with that. It was morning till early afternoon, moving somewhat sideways, volume-wise, and at the end of the day it started shooting up, so good volume at the end of the day. MACD is back and forth, but at the end of the day it was actually showing positive, but it was actually bouncing on MACD. DI showing the same thing, bouncing back and forth. Bollinger Bands always showing that it was moving positive. So this is again another positive stock. Look at the next stock. This is JWN Nordstrom Incorporated. This is another buy indicator, and it was a good positive movement over almost 9.75% rise, so that's good. So let's just have a look at the analysis of it. Volume showing good, pretty much moving positive all day long. Early morning, early afternoon, yeah, it looks sideways a bit, but you can see end of day it was moving positive there. MACD, surprisingly enough, early afternoon it was actually showing downward, but at the end of the day it was showing positive, and then somewhat, baseline at the end of the day. DI though was showing somewhat positive the whole day, so that's good. So MACD showing somewhat positive in general, but DI showing good positive, and OBV showing good positive, and Bollinger Bands showing the end result is that it moved up at the end of the day. So that was another positive trade. Possible positive trade, honestly. Excuse me. CLNW Colony Capital up 6 and almost 3/4, so that's a good one. It was showing that it was up above the entry point indicator, but as you can see, it actually tripped in the afternoon and moved sideways, so still technically a positive trade, but excuse me, I went tripped and went back to the beginning again. Okay. Excuse me. You can see from OBV this is actually moving very good for the day. Moving upwards for the most part of the day on OBV. MACD, you can see late morning it was up and then got a little bit backwards, and then in the afternoon it was up a little bit and then came down. So MACD, it was indicating that it was a positive but not strong. DI was pretty much showing positive all day long, so that's not too bad. There was some bouncing back and forth, but again, the end result is that DI showing positive for the end day results. But as you can see, Bollinger Band is very much showing that it's basically baseline or moving sideways at the end of the day, which would have meant, that if you made money, it would not have been too much, and you probably would have had to wait the next day for it. So I'll put that as a 2 possible instead of an absolute buy opportunity. Let's check the next one. Okay, this one is buy Goldman Sachs. That is a company that's well known, obviously. And 217, 216, 215. Okay, so the end result was that the trigger period was actually showing below the final result, so this would have been a positive try. Let's check the analysis. Analysis is showing good OBV. MACD actually morning was moving down, even though OBV was showing up. MACD was showing that it was moving downward, so that's interesting. But as you can see, the end of the day, afternoon, was somewhat moving positive. So MACD end result is positive, even though it started out as somewhat moving downward. It's interesting because it doesn't correlate, obviously, to other indicators. DI is actually showing very much positive. So DI is positive across the board, and again, Bollinger Band is showing that it was moving upwards. So that would have been another positive trade. And we'll check the next one. Monster Beverages, MNST. This one actually was showing a negative even though it was up. So it's kind of like reverse of the other stocks that I was showing, that it was showing a buy operation on a stock that was down. This is somewhat a reversal of that it's showing a sell operation on a stock that was up. As you can see, it somewhat came down at the end of the day, which is probably why it tripped, in the afternoon. It tripped 3 o'clock around. So it tripped around here, which kind of correlates to the activity of the stock. Let's check the analysis. So it tripped around here but came back up. So the afternoon it tripped. The volume was showing that. MACD was somewhat showing that. But again, they reversed at the end of the day. DI, same type of thing. It was showing very much a negative downward trend in the afternoon. The morning was showing downward trend. And Bollinger Band moving sideways, but at the end of the day it was up. So this would have been a stock that would have not resulted in any invalid trade, even though indicators somewhat were fairly strong. Just that this happened at that point in time, it reverted back to moving positive. Check the last stock, BMRN. This is a buy. Biomarine Pharmaceuticals up 1.5, and early morning it's up. So you can see the stock would have been positive regardless of when you bought it. So it did show 76.62. It ended 76.18. So it actually dropped a little bit at the end of the day. But as you can see, early morning it actually went up even more so than it closed at. So it opened up at 2 2.75. So that's interesting. Obviously, let's see what the analysis is showing. It's showing it was moving strongly on OBV, so that's positive. MACD positive in the morning time, and looks like it came down a bit in the early afternoon. Reverted a little bit and then came back up. MACD is somewhat showing that it was moving positive also. DI, for the most part, showing very much positive movement. And Bollinger moving positive. I'll call this a positive movement, even though it did drop a little bit at the end of the day. As you can see, by this point in time, you could have made money like could have made money. This would have been a close the day after, but it's still, the indicators in that were showing very strong activity. It's just that the stock tripped at the end of the day, and so it came back a little bit. But as you can see, the stock itself early morning was showing it actually went back up again. So this would have been positive after the day that it would have been traded, but still positive. So that's the activity for today. In general, it's indicating that, I can see that there would have been 13 positive trades. 2 would have been questionable, like, may or may have not bought any positive results from them or got any positive results from them. One of them would have not been a positive trade, so you can see overall the system itself indicated a good daily activity. So, a good day. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.